Welcome to Reading and Writing Between the Lines, a podcast series about communication skills in the workplace. I'm your host, John Witzman. Join me as I speak with industry professionals and Conestoga faculty and alumni to explore their journeys with reading and writing skills. Follow us as we talk about how communications learning has changed over the years, how these skills are used in a wide range of industries, and the future of workplace communications. And I think it's probably a great opportunity for us to talk about your work now.
Sure.
You work for Shopify,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that there are all kinds of ways where you are communicating with people inside your organization, outside your organization. What kind of connection can you draw looking back between the experiences you had in school developing these skills and the work that you do now? Do you find yourself drawing on those skills a lot?
Yeah, I would say it's funny. I often in jest say that I use very little from what I learned in school in my current job. But I mean, realistically, I think so much of schooling is, a lot of people will sort of, malign education and say that, I barely use anything that I learned. But I think so much of education is learning how to learn.
Yep.
And being able to, ingest a large volume of information and really distill it down to its core and really understand it in a meaningful way and make an argument about it. And so I would say my sort of adventures in taking in those huge amount, those unsavory texts and then having to write essays about it and do exams and stuff about it, that really did sort of sharpen those skills. And it's funny because I mentioned, I added in a lot of fluff to increase the word count. Now
you have to take it out.
I have to take it out. So much of communications in my current life is again taking in huge amounts of information from multiple sources and distilling it down to its absolute essence. Right. And because there's no room for flowery language when you're trying to convey value or convey a project or a mission or an objective to an executive, someone who's above you, who has you think you're busy, they have so much less time and so many more people demanding their attention.
So they need you to be concise.
You need to be super, super duper concise, and really just get to the heart of the matter through all kinds of mediums of communication. So we're talking about emails, instant messages, but also the real language of Shopify anyways, and I can't speak to other tech organizations, but I can only assume is project briefs. So is really, really forming an argument. Why are you doing this? What are you doing? How will you do it? What is the timeline? And get it as short as you possibly can. If you can get it on one page, that's the ideal situation.
Would that be in a Word doc that is sent as an attachment?
Yeah, it's more like we actually have an internal tool that houses all of them. And every week it's asking you for an update, and that gets sent out in various channels. And leadership is constantly checking on each team's projects and how they're progressing. So
that's so fascinating to me. I have so many questions about writing these project briefs. Do you find that you have become better at writing that particular style of writing over time through practice? Do you find yourself getting it right the first time, or do you edit them in sort of successive drafts? What does that process look like?
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely gotten better just out of necessity. And it's a majorly iterative process.
Can you think of anything that you maybe did in the early days writing project briefs that you identified later on as being something that you needed to change or correct?
Yeah, definitely. I was still sort of really, they were not lean enough. Right. Basically, they were. You talk about a thing and then you talk around it, and then you add in some additional context, and it's the feedback that I always would get is there's too much there. You need to really, really sharpen that and shorten it, and really, really really identify the problem.
When you're producing one, do you have a kind of rough draft where you get all of those thoughts down on the paper and then you cross stuff out?
Yeah, for sure. So there's sort of a template that is offered to everybody to use, and it's like what the first question is: what problem are you trying to solve? How will this add value to Shopify? We also have these like core tenets of like, be a constant learner, get shit done is actually one of our not sorry to curse on your podcast.
But that's a Shopify motto.
It was actually, funnily enough, it was actually when we went public, it was in our, like, the documents. So it was like the first time a curse word was ever in someone's
really
public company documents.
Actually, that's I think something worth discussing in the context of academic reading and writing skills and academic communications. How do you see that sort of line between the things that you did in school and the things that you do in the professional world? Do you see that line as being sort of fuzzy and blurry? Like, is there a lot of overlap between the language of the classroom and the language of the boardroom, if you will, or do you feel like the language and the styles of communication that people use in a fast-paced business environment, a modern tech connected business world, is that somehow more real or more cutting edge than an academic kind of context?
I suppose it would depend on the subject, like
that makes sense.
Like that someone is studying. But I think, like, for me, I think at its core, these things that we're talking about is precise and concise communication is a universal language, and I think I definitely see a lot of parallels there, and so much of the job is so much of my success in my career at all is because of my communication skills.
And that marks the end of another episode of Reading and Writing Between the Lines, a podcast hosted by me, John Witzman, on behalf of the Communications Department and School of Interdisciplinary Studies at Conestoga College. You can find other episodes of this series on our YouTube channel, Reading and Writing Between the Lines. Stay tuned for more episodes. Thanks for listening.